This is the American Legion Radio Report on WVOX AM 1460 and heard around the world on WVOX.com. We have a special guest coming up on the line, but first, here's Ken.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you, Jack. Appreciate your help today. And as it's a memorable day today with the impact of the coronavirus and dropping oil prices has now dropped the Dow 2,051 points to 23,807. Well, we are very pleased to have a call in today from the American Legion down in Washington. This week is American Legion Washington, D.C. conference where members of the American Legion work on policy to support veterans and visit their members of Congress. And to tell us about that is John Raughter from the Communications Division of the American Legion. John, how are you today?
Doing great. How are you, Ken?
Good. This news is concerning. What's happening with the stock market and oil prices, and the cruise ship is docking in California that has several thousand passengers quarantined. So a lot happening. What's happening down in Washington? I know you had a day of meetings for the American Legion Washington conference. What have been some of the highlights so far?
We did. We had some meetings, our National Security Commission met, and some of the highlights are still coming up. We have a event with the Japanese Embassy tonight, this evening, to recognize the 50th anniversary of the U.S.-Japan Joint Alliance, which is one of our really important alliances there in the Pacific. The national commander usually visits Japan as part of his annual Far East tour because we have so many of the troops over there.
Absolutely. And when you talk about the National Security Committee, one of many meeting at events like this, as American Legion members participate in listening and understanding the policy. What have been some of the topics at the national security level this year?
Well, there's always the concern of the, what's happening in the Pacific, particularly China, with the building of the artificial islands, aggressive rattling by not just China, but, we have Iran, North Korea, and of course, there's always the concern for our troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. The national commander issued a statement a few weeks ago expressing his doubt that I think has been very well founded about trusting the Taliban and to honor any type of ceasefire or agreement. Of course, as veterans, nobody hates war more than veterans, so we would love to see the hostilities in Afghanistan end. We just don't know whether you can trust the other party.
Well, that's been an interesting subject, which has been a bit under the radar. We did a show on it last week about the agreement that's been reached in Afghanistan between the United States, the government, and also the Taliban. And so that'll be something to follow. Now, the National Commander of the American Legion is James Bill Oxford. And he was elected in August last year in Indianapolis, an event I was at, or the convention anyway. And tell us a little bit about the work of Commander Oxford this year.
Well, last week, in fact, he was in Parris Island, South Carolina, which is where it all began for him. He was a recruit in Marine Corps boot camp in 1967. So he got to visit as National Commander of the Marine Corps Recruit Depot, and they were a little bit nicer to him this time around.
Imagine so.
Exactly. Although one of the colonels in charge of the chief of staff at MCRD, told the commander that the same bugs that bit him in 1967 were still on the island today biting Marine recruits.
I can only imagine what that experience is like. Now, tomorrow is the event. I'll be traveling down tonight, actually, to attend and to video the commander's call, which Commander Oxford will preside over, which is usually it's always a terrific event. You have members of Congress there and special guests. You usually have an honoree. Tell us a little bit about what's planned for tomorrow, if you can.
Congressman Max Thornberry will be recognized with a Distinguished Public Service Award, and he's been a real friend to veterans in our military. And we're also looking forward to hearing remarks from the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Robert Wilkie, will be addressing us. And we also have the director of the DPAA, Kelly McKeague. And the DPA is a defense agency that's in charge for repatriating and finding and identifying the remains of our POWs and trying to get a full accounting for our MIAs. And they do amazing work. Their lab is in Hawaii, and we've visited that usually on an annual basis, and we have a really solid relationship with these professionals who are working all over the world trying to identify remains. And it's getting harder and harder because the more time has passed, and witnesses are no longer, in many cases, alive. But we definitely encourage any Americans who have lost relatives in some of these wars to submit, to DNA for analysis that can help identify some of the remains that are found.
That is so important to work and painstaking work by this organization. It used to be called the Joint POW MIA Accounting Command, and I know they changed. Yeah, and they changed it more to recognize the DoD as a DoD organization. One of the things that we've been following on that front is the search in Korea for MIAs. There were a terrible toll taken on U.S. military early in the Korean War conflict in 1950. Many American soldiers and chaplains taken prisoner, and the search remains. I understand there's a feeling that several thousand MIAs might be in North Korea now, and there was hope of getting in there last year. Is there any optimism on that front?
I don't know what the status is. As we all know, the North Korean government is very unpredictable, as we've seen with the president negotiating with Chairman Kim. We do know, I kind of sensed when I was talking to the DPAA officials that in many ways it can be very exasperating. But the commander, we are still identifying remains that have come in many years ago from North Korea. We witnessed a dignified transfer of those remains taken from the Punch Bowl in a cemetery in Hawaii, the Cemetery of the Pacific. And they were very respectful, and they were taking those remains that had been buried, and they were transferring them to the lab in Honolulu, where they're in the process of identifying. And that's, again, where the DNA analysis is so important.
Well, absolutely. Now, Key, obviously you mentioned the Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs, Mr. Wilkie will be there tomorrow. What are some of the key issues American Legion is following in trying to make sure veterans get the best possible care from the VA?
Well, there's a Blue Water Navy Act, which passed, but we are still seeing some issues with veterans that, some of their illnesses that are being dealt with today can still be linked and are not recognized. Like we like to see bladder cancer, hyperthyroidism. There's some Parkinson-like symptoms that are still not being recognized for these purposes, and we do know the damaging effects that Agent Orange can have. So we would like to see that. Also, with the Mission Act, we're seeing some issues. We worked so hard to get the Mission Act approved, but it is much better than the Choice Act, where veterans were having problems with the paperwork and just getting approved to see private providers when VA care wasn't available. But with the Mission Act, a lot of times a lot of physicians they're not happy with the reimbursement that they're getting from the government, so they're choosing not to accept veterans. And we want the VA system has been called the best care anywhere, and we don't want it to turn into a system where they have to settle for the cheapest care or whatever physician will accept, payment. So that is a concern. We think that the Mission Act can be implemented a little bit better by having, fair and sufficient payment for the physicians that some of the VA veteran patients have to rely on.
John, just have a few seconds left, but I want to ask you, because you do so much work for transitioning veterans, helping them find jobs and helping them with receive tuition reimbursement. How is all that going?
It is going very well. We have job fairs. The Legion sponsors and partners with job fairs all across the country, because I know that was my number one priority when I left the Marine Corps many years ago, decades ago. But for your young man or woman getting out of the military, and not all want to go to college right away. Some do. We have the GI Bill for that. But sometimes it's like, okay, what am I going to do next when I get out? And it's just smart business. It not only helps the veteran, it helps the employer, because they're getting someone who's disciplined, who's been tested under stressful conditions. They're usually physically fit. They know the meanings of sacrifice, and they can get a solid employee. So we look at it as a win-win.
Hey, John Raughter, calling from the American Legion Conference in Washington, D.C. and the Communication Division. Thank you very much for jumping in with us here on Sons of the American Legion Radio.
Thank you, Ken. We really appreciate the opportunity.
Okay, I'll see you tomorrow, hopefully. And Jack,
Yeah,
I just want to, absolutely, Jack, thank you so much. Appreciate your help today.
Alrighty. You've been listening to the Sons of the American Legion Radio Report on WVOX AM 1460 and heard around the world on WVOX.com. We thank today's guest, John Raughter from the Communications Department of the American Legion down in Washington. Remember to check out our Facebook pages, Sons of the American Legion Radio, our Sea Services page, and the West Point Football Report page, all on Facebook. And until next week, remember to thank a veteran.